Dale Clemens is a fisherman, well-known author, lecturer, and consummate rod crafter. In the next 90 minutes, Dale will guide you through the fundamental steps of building your own fishing rod, and perhaps opening the door to a new facet of fishing creativity.
Hi, I'm Dale Clemens. One of the pleasures of fishing comes from the handling and the mastery of your equipment. The comfortable feel of the rod in your hand and the rhythm of the cast, whether it be with an 11-foot stick in heavy surf or a delicate midge rod on a remote mountain stream. That pleasure is intensified many times if the rod is one that you have built yourself. And it's hard to beat the thrill of capturing a fish on a rod that you designed and you made. I know of no greater sense of satisfaction for the dedicated fisherman. While there are lots of reasons why rod building is the fastest growing segment of the tackle industry, undoubtedly the main one is the fact that you can build a better rod than you can buy. As we'll see on this tape, there are some very important things that you can do that will enable you to build a much better rod, things that in a rod factory are just economically not possible. But if you do them, you'll substantially increase the performance of the rod. No one will put the care and attention to detail into a rod that you will when it's your own rod. You can select the components that you desire in order to give you the action, the balance, and the feel the way you like it. In short, it's the only way to really get exactly the rod that you want. And as we'll see, it's easy and it's fun. The first place to start in building a rod is to select a blank. And manufacturers categorize blanks according to the type: fly, spinning, casting, etc. And they also provide the specifications that you need in order to make the right choice. The first place to start is, when you're looking at these blank tables, is to select for the lure weight range or the fly line weight. This will probably be expressed such as 1/8 to 3/8 ounces or a 5 to 6 weight fly line. The second place is to select a blank of the length rod that you want to build. And then lastly, turn to the column that shows the action. And here you want to get an action that fits with your preference. As the diagram shows, action is just another way of explaining what percentage of the rod actually bends in casting. On a slow action rod, the whole rod or a great portion bends. On a fast action, just the very tip. That term is also indicative of the kind of timing that you'll need in your casting. In the fast action rod, where only the tip bends and recoils rather rapidly, your timing has to be fast. If, on the other hand, it's a slow action rod and more of the rod bends, then it takes longer and you have more time to react. Timing is not as critical and it's more forgiving. The reason we have all these different kinds of actions is simply because everybody has their own preference when it comes to a fishing rod. Every rod blank made has an effective spine, and this is one side that is stiffer or appears more stiff or more rigid than the other side. 180 degrees to it on the other side of the blank will be what appears to be a soft side or a side that's less rigid. You might have encountered this if you've ever fought a really large fish and the rod wanted to twist and turn in your hands. What was happening is that the fish was applying a force to the rod, and this caused the rod to seek the point of least resistance, which was the soft side, wanted to twist toward the fish. If we were going to build a rod that we were going to use just for trolling or as a boat rod, not for casting, we could make sure that it would never twist in the hand by setting it up. That is, placing the reel seat and the guide such that the soft side would always be on the bottom, facing the fish. On rods that we build for casting purposes, this spine and the soft side play just as important a role, in fact more so. If a rod is not set up absolutely perfectly correct, it's going to throw the line off from one side or to the other. And the reason for that is that when you're casting, you're applying a force to the rod. And the basic instability due to this one side stiffer and one side softer will cause the lure or the fly line to be thrown off from one side or the other. Now the way that's corrected, and you can make a rod that will cast quite accurately, is to make sure that the spine is in the casting plane of the rod. That is, if we were going to cast through like this, then we'd want the spine to be either directly on top of the blank or 180 degrees to it on the bottom. What determines whether the spine would be on top or on the bottom as we move the rod through the casting plane really is a factor of a whole bunch of different things. One we've already discussed, and that was the relative importance of a fish fighting tool that this rod might serve. The other would be the combination of factors of where the greatest force is applied, on the back cast or the forward cast. Now we've worked this out for you, and you can set up your rods as follows. On a rod, let's take a rod where we're going to put the spine on top of the blank. We're going to set the rod up in that way. These rods would be trolling rods or boat rods, saltwater fly rods, saltwater spinning rods, and all casting or worm rods. On another set of rods, we'll put the spine on the bottom, and these would be freshwater fly rods and freshwater spinning rods. Okay, we've been talking a lot about the spine. The way to locate it is like this. It's really not very difficult. Take the rod and put it on a smooth, hard surface so that you can roll it at about a 45-degree angle. And place your left hand up near the tip of the rod and use your right hand to press down and put a slight deflection in the blank. Now, if you roll this rod back and forth with your palm, you can see it jump, and you'll feel the stiff side or the effective spine, the point of greatest resistance. When you have that, take a pencil, and assuming you've already put a piece of masking tape underneath, wrapped around the blank, just put a line on there. Now, I generally measure that 3 times to make sure that it's accurate. And that mark is going to be important to you because when you set up the rod and you place the reel seat on it, and when you place the guides on it, that's going to tell you where your spine is. I think you can see from the kind of measurement and detail we're talking about here that this isn't the kind of thing that most rod companies can afford to do very economically. And as a result, it doesn't get done in most factory-made rods. And it's another example of where you, as a custom builder, can make a better fishing instrument. Let's look next at the handle end of the rod and some of the basic ways that handles are put together on rods. Of all the different handle assemblies that you might make for a fishing rod, the casting handle is probably the easiest of all, because really all it consists of is an entirely separate handle with a chuck and this little adapter or ferrule which is glued onto the end of the blank. So you glue this on and allow it to set up, cure overnight, and then it merely plugs in and this chuck locks it down. And that's all there is to assembling that particular type of casting handle. What's become increasingly popular is a type of casting handle where the blank extends all the way through the handle itself. And let's take a look at this. This detaches because you see how far the blank comes down. And then inside here there are some arbors. I just have them set in. Well, we might have to tap this one out. There we are. These little arbors you would first take and file them so that they would fit into the right place on the blank. Then this piece is glued over the arbors so that that's snug, and now this is glued into the bottom portion of the grip. And this is a one-piece through handle construction. By turning this portion in the front, the reel seat hood, this one, moves back and forth, and that's what locks and holds your reel in place. The fly rod also has a very easy assembly. You have a grip. We'll come back to that in a minute. Let's look at the reel seat. On all of these reel seats, when they're mounted, we have to take up the space between the blank and the inside diameter of the seat itself. Now in this case, I've used bushings made of masking tape, and they will be reinforced, and we'll go into this later, with epoxy glue to give them adequate strength to hold the grip, the reel seat. The grip itself, in this case, I've used a preformed grip, which is taper-reamed to fit. It could also be made of individual cork rings that are glued on. Or a system like this could be used, which has nylon rings in, and we call a modular system. Now, an ultralight spinning handle is made in two parts. The first part is glued on after it's taper-reamed. Then the sliding rings go on. Then this other part is taper-reamed to fit, and it's glued in place. A little winding check which goes in the front of most handles goes on. We have to do it this way because the grip is flared here and back here so that the rings don't come off. Here's a pretty typical conventional spinning handle assembly, and it comes apart or goes together depending upon how you're approaching it, like this. On the butt grip, it's been recessed, and I've got a little masking tape there because I took off a little too much cork. That's how you make up for that slight error. Put this, fit that on and glue it in place. Now for the arbors here, to fill the space between the reel seat and the blank, I've used cork arbors. And they're fitted to the blank, then the outside diameter is fitted to the reel seat, and the reel seat is glued in place over top of them. And again, the foregrip is simply reamed out to fit and glued in place. These could be individual rings, or they could be, as they are here, pre-shaped grips, or they could be the modular approach. This is a handle assembly for offshore boat rods and trolling rods. And here we're using a material that's a resilient grip material, a reel seat that is made of fiber plastic with stainless steel hoods, and hard arbors, Sensitron arbors. This grip is first pushed in place and mounted, then these arbors are filed out so that they'll fit the diameter of the blank, and they're adjusted in diameter if need be for the seat, but these particular ones come with these seats and they're paired up. The seat is then glued in place over it, and this grip material, which always has to be a little bit smaller, the hole does, than the size of the blank, so that this can be lubricated with glue and slid into place. So you have to push it, it's a little tight, and that's just what we want. That's how that's made. It's a newer form where the handle comes all the way through. It's constructed just like a spinning rod handle where you work from the butt to the fore end. This last handle here is the older style for offshore big game trolling rods. This is a unibutt that's made all in one piece of aluminum, and it locks into this ferrule here. The ferrule goes in and there's a groove. I don't know if you can see that little V there. That V engages a pin that goes crosswise inside the reel seat. And that turns and locks in place. This nut here screws down and locks this portion, the rod and the blank, to the butt. Now the way that's attached, that ferrule, if I unscrew it, pull it off, you can see that this ferrule is simply glued on here. These little bands of masking tape are merely to keep a non-flowing epoxy paste that we'll show you how to mount later on. That keeps it centered so that everything is perfectly lined up. This flocked foregrip is nothing more than a basic cork form. You purchase it this way and in choice of colors, but it is built on a cork form, and all you need to do is ream it out to fit the blank. So just on those handles that we've covered here, we've touched on all the different ways that any kind of handle would be made. We've talked about cork, we've talked about resilient grips, and you can see they come in different colors, even some that I don't have on my display board. And we've talked about all the different ways to mount them. So let's go and look specifically at how you might make some cork handles. All right, let's see how some of these handles are actually put together in detail. There are a number of ways that you can make your own cork grips. The easiest one, perhaps, is to simply glue the cork rings directly onto the blank. And these cork rings all are 1/2 inch long. You'll find they do come with different hole sizes, and you want to make sure when you're buying your cork rings that the hole size is smaller than the diameter of the blank. Then you can file out or ream out the ring so you can get a snug fit on the blank. Let me give you a tip about gluing. Whenever you glue two surfaces together and you want to get a stronger bond, roughen each side of them. For example, we're going to glue up the cork rings on the blank here. And that's glossy and shiny. If I take this sandpaper and just sand this and roughen it up, I'm going to provide a whole bunch of little tiny minute grooves into which the epoxy glue will flow, and it'll make for a much stronger bond. Now I can go about starting to fit my cork rings. What I found makes it easy, especially in the beginning, is to take this cork ring and put a mark on it for reference. The reason is we want to keep the hole in the center of the cork. So if we take and just put a pen mark, just like that on there, then we can take our round file, and you probably already have a round rat tail file, and we can insert it in here at about the angle, although there's not much angle in 1/2 inch. But count the number of strokes, and then we're going to turn this a little bit. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and turn 1/8 of a turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And just keep repeating this in each 1/8 of a turn. That's why that mark is there. That's a reference point. And you do this, you'll keep that ring or the hole right in the center of the ring. Okay? We get it. We don't want it too tight. That's just about the right tightness there. Now there's a faster way to reaming out these cork rings that if you get into building mini rods, you might want to consider, and that is what we call a tapered reamer. You can make these yourself. You need some scraps of old broken blank or broken fishing rod, or you can buy them already made up. But it's just epoxied, grit is epoxied on the outside, cutting grit. Let me show you the difference and how much faster. You take and put this in here, and we're not so worried now about a centering mark because we just bring this all the way up there, do a little twisting with it, and we've got a nice hole right in the center, and we can put on, now I need to take a little bit more off, which means just push it up a little further on the mandrel, just like that, or the arbor, or the reamer, whatever you want to call it. Push this down, and there we are. And we just keep proceeding, finishing up each cork as we go along. When you have all the cork rings in place on the rod, then number them. The reason for numbering them is to make sure that when you go to actually glue them onto the blank, you got them in the right sequence. Because remember, that blank is tapered, and it's wider down here than it is up here. We want to have a nice, good, tight fit all over. So I've just numbered them consecutively. In this case, we've got 14 of them, which means that at 1/2 inch each, we know we're going to have a grip that's 7 inches long. And now that they're numbered, it's safe to take them off, and we're going to be able to reassemble them in exactly the same sequence. And if you don't do this, you might think, well, I can lay them out here on a table in the right order. You might get away with it, but you might also bump them or knock them. And once you do, you're going to be very sorry. Okay, now we're ready to glue them, and what you want to use is epoxy glue, slow cure, not 5 minute. On the first cork, you want to apply the epoxy just to the blank here at the bottom and spread it out evenly, about 1 inch long, over the blank. Now I'm using a little spatula, but you could use a popsicle stick, a pipe cleaner, anything that's convenient. Then take your cork ring and bring it down, and as it comes home, turn the cork. This will spread the epoxy into the little holes that are in the cork and push it all the way home. Now for the next cork, we want to apply epoxy not just to the blank, but also we want to spread it on the actual face of the cork. so that we have epoxy filling every little pore in there, and that's what helps make a good strong bond. Take our second cork, bring it down. Now when we get here, we'll do just as we did before. We're going to turn it to spread it. And in fact, when it gets all the way seated, we definitely want to turn it a little bit, because that spreads the cork into the second ring, or spreads the glue into the second cork, just like that. When all the cork rings are glued in place on the blank in the proper sequence, as we see the numbers here, then we can clamp them. And really what's nice about epoxy glue is you don't need a big involved clamp. All you need is something that's going to hold them in place. And I use a very simple clamp. What it is a couple of rubber bands and 4 nails. And this rubber band is looped on this side and around over here and across these nails. And that just holds everything snug together. As I said, we don't need to compress it. In fact, it's dangerous. If you try and really compress these corks with a clamp, you can make them smaller than they were, and they're going to bulge out. And you didn't gain any strength or anything by it. It's a good idea if you had a lot of excess epoxy that is squeezed out to wipe it off. This one's fairly clean. But get all the excess epoxy off. And now you just need to let this set and let it dry overnight. I'd let it set at least overnight. Now that our epoxy glue has had a good chance to cure, we can remove our little improvised clamp here of nails and rubber bands. And I think you'll see that we really have a strong bond. It's one of the nice things about epoxy. You can take that and there's no way is that going to come loose. Now we start to do our shaping. And here you can use any number of files or rasps, or you can take a block of wood and use it behind some sandpaper. Anything that you happen to have and that's convenient, because cork shapes rather easily. I'm going to use this rasp here. And you start by removing some of the cork. First make it into a cylinder. But you notice what I'm doing. I take a few strokes, and then with my left hand I turn the blank a little bit. Much like we did when we filed those holes in the rings. We wanted to keep the hole in the center. Well, here we want to keep the blank in the center as we remove material. If you have to take a lot of material off, and you're going to have to reduce the diameter quite a bit, here's a suggestion. First, take this down and make it into a square, okay? Then take your square and knock off the corners into an octagon. And that's so close to being round that it's really easy to take it the rest of the way. Once you have the shape and the contours the way you want, you're down to very fine sandpaper. Here's another trick, if there are tricks in rod building, but a tip, that when you're working with cork, never use a knife, always use files or sandpaper, and always go through every grade of sandpaper you have, down to the very finest. Don't skip right from, let's say, shaping this thing with 60 or 80 grit, and then jump right to fine sandpaper. You'll get what will feel smooth, but it's going to be all pebbly and bumpy. So instead, work progressively through all the grades, and then get down to the finest grade of sandpaper you have, and just polish it carefully all over, and that's what gives it that beautiful velvet-like feel that cork is so famous for. Another approach to making a cork grip for your handle, instead of gluing the cork rings directly onto the rod blank, is to glue them up separately and make a preformed cork grip. To do this, you're going to need an electric drill and a little stand to hold it, and we'll call this our little miniature lathe. And then we need some kind of a mandrel or shaft around which we'll assemble the corks. You could use a steel mandrel, you could use a nice straight wood dowel, or a length of all thread rod. This is commonly available in hardware stores. It's threaded its entire length, and you can take some nuts and washer and lock it up nicely. What I've got in the drill now is a piece of just plain steel. You'll notice I had to shim it out a little bit with some masking tape. That's so that I get a good tight fit with the cork rings when I glue them. Whether you have masking tape on or not, you're going to have to use a release agent. And the best thing I've found is just plain common paraffin. You could also use candle wax, but take this paraffin and just rub it all over the mandrel. Get a good coating. If masking tape is on, coat the masking tape. And that'll act as a release agent so that when your grip is finished, it'll just pull off. The glue will not adhere to the mandrel. All right, let's shape our little grip here. Turn on the lathe and start with coarse sandpaper, and first get this into a nice true cylinder, and then start basically getting to the contours that you want. Another material that you could use would be that sand screen sitting here, which is much like screening but is impregnated with grit. And as you work your shape in, you'll slowly progress down from a coarse grit to a very fine grit of sandpaper. I like to finish up with the finest grade of sandpaper I have. 600 is a good one. You can use 400 if that's all you have, but 600 gives that extra smooth velvet feel. Now we'll see just what our preformed grip is like. Pull it off and you'll find out whether or not the release agent works, which it does in this case. And there's our nice preformed grip, ready to be fit to put on the blank. Whether you build your cork grip on the blank by gluing the rings on, as we've seen, or if you make a preformed grip on the mandrel, it takes very little extra time to insert these burnt cork trim rings and customize your handle. And what you see here in each of these dark spots is that burnt cork. Now these, we call it burnt cork, but it's really a compressed dark brown cork. And one of the beauties of it is that it sands and shapes and feels in the hand just like regular cork. So the shaping of the grip after it's been glued together is exactly the same as what we've covered. Another nice thing about burnt cork is that you can take and assemble these in just all kinds of creative designs. And I'm just going to try and make a sandwich here. And you get a chance to preview or see what your grip might be like, looking at it ahead of time. And in that way, you don't necessarily commit to gluing. The rings are available in 2 thicknesses, and also you can get them in larger sticks. On our tape creative rod crafting, we're going to cover some of the more intricate things that you can do with burnt cork, such as these checkerboard inlays and mosaics made up here of diamonds and so on. And I think you'll see that it's just an open field to be able to do anything that you so desire. All right, let's go on next to how we fit these preformed grips that we've made so that they'll fit onto the blank. Not only do we need to fit the preformed cork grip to conform to the blank, but we have the same problem, if we want to call it a problem, and that is of converting a round hole inside the cork to a tapered object, that is the blank. That's going to be exactly the same way inside this flocked foregrip, which is really done on a cork form, or this is a cork reel seat insert for on a skeleton seat, which we'll talk about later. These are cork arbors that shim out the reel seat, and over here we have what are called sensitron arbors, a harder material but extremely lightweight. And they also all have round holes, and we've got to convert those round holes to a tapered hole. And we do this much the same way that we did when we talked about reaming out the cork ring to fit it. Make a mark on the cork so that you have a reference point, and using a round file, insert your file. Now what you want to try and do is get the file at about the same angle this way as the taper on the blank. Now I know this is difficult or seems difficult. It's not. just get it in there at about an angle and start to work. And we're going to count strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4, and turn an 8 to the turn. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll just keep repeating, using that reference point, so we get 8 turns all the way around, removing some material. Then take our grip and see how well it fits onto the blank. You see it comes down to about here, so I need to take a little more material off. But I want to find out, where have I taken most of the material off? Is it more on one end than the other or not? And I can feel that by wobbling it a little bit. If it wobbles mostly at this end, I know I've made the hole bigger at this end. If it wobbles more at this end, then I know I made the hole a little bit too large there. Now if I progressively fit this and work slowly and carefully, and all it takes is a little time, you work down the blank till it fits in position. So I'm going to take this off. This was pretty even. And I'll come back. Now if I wanted to get a little more off the middle, you'll notice my files don't have handles on them. And that's because I might want to put the file in with the thick side into the grip like this, and not all the way. I'll try and show you. See how far that's in there? Only in a short way, so that I'm working off a lot of the middle, the high side. And again, count my strokes, work it like that. But don't put handles on. Use your files any way you can. You might want to, at times, just really scrape off an edge. It's just a tool that's going to take out cork for you. Okay, we take this, slip it on again, and now it comes down all the way. It's fit. We're set. It doesn't wobble unnecessarily. And all we need to do to mount that is take and apply epoxy to the blank, and then bring our grip in over the epoxy, and as we do, we're going to rotate the grip. Whenever you're mounting two pieces together with glue, always rotate the one of them. This spreads the glue into all the little crevices and crannies. And there it is, and we just leave it sit overnight until the epoxy cures. These grips that you see here are made with a system we call a modular handle system. And they're made with only 3 parts, 3 particular corks. If you look at these here, you'll see that there are long pieces that are straight, short straight pieces, and tapered pieces. And this happens to be a spinning handle, this a fly. You can make it up in any kind of configuration you wanted, whether it be a long butt steelhead rod or saltwater rod. Use a trigger seat for a casting handle. It's just beautiful, the different things you can do with it. And these just 3 corks. They're held together, and what gives them the distinctive look are these nylon rings. And if you'll notice, the corks have a recess. And this nylon ring fits into there. Of course, you glue them. But they almost kind of snap together just like that, so that you can combine them in any way you want. And what's very nice is that nylon ring is below the surface of the cork, which you can possibly see here. And since it is below, your hand is not touching the cork, or is not touching the ring, it's touching the cork, which is what you want. A very nice system, and one of the biggest advantages of it is that it's easy to fit. No piece is longer than 1.7 inches, so you can take a plain round file and taper ream it and get a good fit, tight fit, no chance of a lot of wobble or anything else, and a good glue bond. I really like this system. It puts a lot of fun into rod building. All right, let's go over here and talk about some of the ways that we can mount our reel seats onto the rod. As we saw initially when we looked at handle assemblies, you have to shim that space out between the blank and the reel seat. The seat is bigger than the blank. Well, this is the masking tape arbor system, which we showed briefly. Now, I've already constructed these masking tape arbors, and if you'll notice, there's space between each one. That's important, and I'll show you in a minute when we get to glue them. But you never want to make solid masking tape arbors that would fill that whole space. You want to have space in between them. Our reel seat, before we glue it on, it's always a good idea to take the rod builder's best friend, masking tape, and wrap some around the edge of the grip. The reason for this is we're probably going to smear some glue in those threads if we don't. And this way, when we finish, we can just peel off the masking tape. You might recall earlier I said whenever you glue two surfaces together in a fishing rod, you want to roughen them to get a better bond. Well, you want to roughen the inside of this reel seat too. And you could use a file, you could take, oh goodness, any tool that I could scratch it up with. I like these masking tape, or these tapered reamers, because they're full of cutting grit. And I just take it and put it inside there, scrape it around, and roughen up the inside of the aluminum. Doesn't take much, but I will get a better glue bond. Okay, we're set. Now move, I've already pre-mixed my epoxy here, and this is slow cure epoxy, not 5 minute. I'm going to turn this, and I'm going to spread the glue first on the outside of the arbor, of each masking tape arbor, so that I've covered the surface. Spread that rather quickly. But then, my point about leaving a space between was because we want to get some of this epoxy glue down, and watch what I'm going to do, right down in there against the blank, and I'm really covering the side of the masking tape arbor with the epoxy. That gives it probably about 4 or 5 or maybe 10 times, I don't know, but a lot more strength. And spread out so I have a lot of epoxy covering the sides as well as the top. And I have it spread all evenly. I'm going to use every last bit of it, because what I don't need will just be squeezed out. Okay, I'm ready now to put on the reel seat. You see, I just take the seat, put it in, and remember I said before, twist or turn the parts as you join them. That's to spread the epoxy into all the little grooves and so on. Now, you see there, I had a little bulb of epoxy. I want that to fall down into that space between the arbors. There we are. Turn it a couple times, make sure it's spread in. Now, I can wipe off the excess, and then take and peel off my masking tape, and with it comes that glue that otherwise would have gotten into the threads and been hard to get out. And now I would look up on the blank and find the mark that we made initially for where the spine was, and whether this was going to be a rod with it on top or on the bottom. I'd make that adjustment, and I would carefully turn the seat to get it aligned. Once I have it aligned, I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to leave it go till the next day. Another way to fill the space between the blank and the reel seat is to use arbors of either cork or of this more stiff, rigid material that can be power-shaped. This system versus the masking tape arbors has a little more strength. It's frequently used on saltwater rods for light duty, or the typical spinning rod for freshwater. And there are two approaches to take to fitting these arbors to both the reel seat and the blank. The first approach is to simply take the arbor like this and file it, ream it out so that it fits on the blank, and glue it, which I've already done here. These are glued up. Now I need to take the outside diameter of the arbors down so that they'll fit inside the reel seat. And that's easily enough done back with that easy shaping of cork with a nice file or a sanding block, anything that'll remove material rather rapidly. And here, don't worry about looks or appearances. If anything, you want to have it good and rough for a good glue bond. And you can use your reel seat as a template to see whether or not you're fitting. And I'm already getting a good fit because I've done a little bit of shaping before here. Now you test it, and yep, that's a good fit. So I would just go ahead now and glue this as we talked about gluing before. The other way that I can fit these arbors is to first fit them onto a mandrel, much like when we made the preformed grips. And you see here I had to shim out the mandrel with a little bit of masking tape, and I put the arbors on, And then I'd simply chuck them up in the drill, sand them down under power, and when they're the right diameter, I'd merely take them off, and they're ready to mount. Let me show you a little trick if you do it this way, and you can do it the other technique too, but that is take a small triangular file and file a couple of little keyways or slots in that cork. And what that does, that's a ridge that fills with epoxy. When you mount it on the blank, it'll give you a stronger bond than you'd get otherwise. Heavy-duty trolling rods really are subject to some pretty extreme pressures. You remember this we showed before. It's an aluminum unibutt and an offshore trolling blank, and they're joined with this ferrule assembly here. That's what locks inside the aluminum butt. We're going to look at how you would mount that joint to get the strength that you need, and also to match a tapered blank into a round hole. Now you might say, well, it doesn't taper very much in that short distance, and you're right, but we're talking about real punishment that these rods can take. We're talking 50, 100-pound line, big fish. We don't want any chance of breakage. So we've got to have the blank absolutely centered inside and the strongest possible connection. And that's also the same situation we'd have if we were building a heavy-duty saltwater rod and we were putting the reel seat on. But I'm going to illustrate it with the ferrule because we'll use the exact same technique. And the technique is pretty simple. These little pieces of masking tape, they're 1/4-inch tape. And they're not going to serve any structural purpose whatsoever. What they do is they act as centering shims. So that when I put this in, and I've already, of course, fitted this, but this is a nice, comfortable fit. In between these and around them is going to go a non-flowing paste-type epoxy. I've chosen PC7 because it happens to be very, very strong. And I'm going to put that on here and then put the grip on. Now, one of the things about PC7 is it's extremely sticky. It sticks to everything. So I've got some alcohol in that jar, and I'll show you how when we get to it here, how I can touch this stuff with the alcohol on a tool or on my finger, that if I did it otherwise, like this spatula here, it just sticks all over. Just spread this kind of like butter, lard, and fill up the space. That's what we want to do, is fill that space between the shims. I've got a little bit too much on here. Don't worry about the end. Let it slop right over. Okay? Now, if I were to touch that, it would stick all over. But watch this. See? It's pretty tricky. And as long as I dip my finger or a tool into that alcohol, I can take and smooth this out, move it just where I want it, and it doesn't affect the curing properties of the PC7, which is a 2-part epoxy mix. It's just non-flowing. It's got a filler in it. Okay? Now, I'm ready to take the ferrule, or remember we said we could be doing this with the reel seat, same thing, and I'm going to put this in. And we said before, you always twist to spread the epoxy. We now have this in, and we now have the enviable task of getting the excess off. It's a sticky wicket. It's a messy job, but it's the strongest way that anybody's come up with yet to get a heavy-duty reel seat mounted or a ferrule. Now what I'm doing now is just slopping on quite a bit more of that alcohol, because I'll use it as a solvent to help me wipe off the excess. And that's another nice thing about using solvents such as alcohol rather than some of these stronger things like lacquer thinner and acetone. they'll work, and not with this particular epoxy, but with a lot of them. But there, you're handling some very volatile stuff, some stuff that's dangerous, that can get in through your skin and do you body damage. And good old rubbing alcohol, that ain't going to hurt you at all. And there we are. It's glued up, and all it needs now is to cure overnight. And of course, I'd set it aside nice and level for that purpose. Now let's look at a specialized type of reel seat. I'll just leave this go for a minute. One nice thing about PC7 is you have a working time of a good hour. We'll look over here at skeleton reel seats. Now, skeleton reel seats are a way to add, I like to think of it as a touch of class, or a little bit of distinctive look to a fishing rod. And you've probably seen them most often on quality fly rods. You see it on some spinning rods. If I'm building a spinning rod, what the heck, I like to put it on because it adds that distinctive touch. And these are different reel seats here. Here's a spinning one, skeleton reel seat. What do we mean by skeleton? Well, like a skeleton, just the bones, this is the bare bones framework. You see the piece that's missing, that hole in the middle, this space in here? That's just been cut out. That's where it would be the straight barrel of the reel seat. And they took that out, and instead, you can put in there whatever you want. You can put in cork, or in this case, in resin impregnated walnut, and you can make yourself a very nice, handsome-looking reel seat. I did want to take a fly seat, however, and show you on a good quality fly seat you have a milled slot, which is this slot right here where there are no threads. Now 1 foot of the reel is going to go in there. The other foot has to go into this hood. So when you glue this together with epoxy glue, you want to make sure that you turn this so that it's lined up with the other hood, and then carefully set it down and let that epoxy cure. This is the way you join the reel seat. You assemble it, and from there on, mounting it's the same as any other seat. You can, in rare situations, you might have a blank diameter that's larger than the whole diameter here, but with most of the graphites today, they're pretty small, and if anything, you're going to have to shim it up. But if necessary, you can file this out and ream it out a little bit. Most of the time, you'll just shim it up with a little masking tape, which is fine for fly rods, epoxy it all together, and there you have that, what I call the look of distinction. Another grip material that's grown increasingly popular are resilient grips. And this particular one is called Custom Grip 2. It's very rugged. It won't chip like cork is prone to do at times. It's got a very nice texture, feel in the hand. It's also colorful, as you can see. You can do a lot of pretty things and nice things with it. It's really an excellent material to use for grips. Some people shy away from it because they're concerned about the difficulty of mounting it. And let me dispel that right now. It's not difficult to mount at all. It's really rather easy. What you want to keep in mind is that you want the hole size, and I'll have a blank here that we'll mount it on. You want the hole size to be smaller than the size of the grip. In other words, that's the point where it stops, because we're going to have to stretch this material. But we need something to lubricate the blank so that as we slide the grip down and expand it, and whatever we're using as a lubricant might as well be the glue that has to hold things together, and that's why we'll use slow cure epoxy. Some people use evaporative cements, and I'd caution you not to do so, because when that grip stretches out and it's down there, the air is hardly ever going to get in there, and it might be a year at least before it would dry. Use epoxy. It's a good lubricant, and it will anchor everything in place. Okay, I've got some epoxy mixed here. And the first thing to do is take the grip and just drop it and see where it drops to naturally. Take that point in your mind, back the grip up a bit, and we want to spread some epoxy right on there, and then we're going to spread some down below as well. And this is messy. You'll notice I've spread newspaper out. By all means, put a lot of newspaper, have some paper towels ready, and alcohol for cleanup. You take this and just Spread, mostly I have a collar up around the top where the grip fell naturally. And now I'm just spreading some. I'm not going to cover the whole blank. Just spread some in spots, but I'll make another collar of epoxy down near the bottom here. And you can see this is sloppy. That epoxy is already running down on the newspaper. Okay. All right, we've got all our epoxy in place. Now you take the grip and bring it down into that epoxy, and first take and move it around a bit. Twist it, turn it, so that it's well covered with epoxy. Here's one of the tricks. Take your hand, make a grip like this right at the top, okay? And we don't want to squeeze with our whole hand. We just want to squeeze the top, kind of close it off and make an air seal. And then we're going to push. And once we start to push, we don't want to stop. We want to just keep pushing it all the way down until it goes into place, okay? Now I've got a mess up here, which just have paper towel handy and wipe off the worst of it. And I'm just holding this grip down here for the moment because we have to do something important with this grip. Now this one I didn't have to stretch it too much. Sometimes when you stretch it, the grip is going to constrict. So it'll lose its length. You'll lose something. So take your hand like this, put it in and twist. I'm twisting this hand this way and this way, and I'm pulling apart at the same time. And I stretch it right back to the original length. Get this set up, and there we are. What will help you clean up the blank, and you don't want your blank to be marred, is some of that alcohol. Just put that on the paper towel and wipe it down. And the blank is back to new. Looks just fine. Everything's set up very nicely. And that'll evaporate off. Let that go. And that's really all there is to mounting a custom grip or any other resilient grip. If you're really concerned and you've really got a situation where the hole is very small and the blank gets very big, let me throw a couple ideas out that maybe would help you. One is a thing called a push board. It's kind of a substitute for that finger grip that I was talking about. If you take this, your selection of holes, and you put this over, you could see where it would take and come up against the grip, and you could just push it down that way. Okay? That's a push board, and it's a help. Another technique, again, when you're really concerned, you've got a big blank and a small grip, is take the grip and boil it for about 20 minutes in water. And that'll soften it a little bit. Just pull it out with tongues and it won't be that hot. You can dry it off and mount it right away. One of the nice things about custom grip too is that it can be shaped. It's a material that you can't shape just by hand and sanding with cork, but you can shape it with power. As we've seen, you can shape it on our little improvised lathe, which was a drill in a stand or in a lathe. These grips here were all made by cutting and inlaying and shaping pieces of custom grip too. And on our tape Creative Rod Crafting, we're going to go into just how this is done, because it's a lot of fun and it's another form of creative expression for rod builders to play with. Well, we have only one more part that we really need to concern ourselves with as far as completing the handle construction, and that's the butt cap. Now, the butt cap protects the rod, very functional use, and also can protect the fisherman if he's poking that rod into a stomach, fighting what hope we will have as a nice big fish. It's also a cosmetic piece. It kind of acts as the terminal point at the bottom of the rod, so shape, color, texture all come into play. And that might look like a pretty good variety of butt caps. You probably find 3 times that many in total existence. But let's look at how you mount a butt cap. The simplest way of all, if this was a rod we were building and we had the butt grip, would be find a butt cap. The ID on the hole here is the same size or a little bit larger, and just put it over top like that and glue it in place. And that's really all that would be needed in that particular situation. Another way, however, would be to blend in the lines. In other words, let's say if we had this cap where the outside of diameter of the cap is pretty close to the outside diameter of the grip, but we'd like to blend it all in. The inside diameter would be smaller because it's a pretty thick-walled cap. Okay, what I would do is first I find out about, I'm going to make a recess so you know what I'm doing, find out about how much cork I'm going to need to take off. Get a little line. And then I want to build a little template for my filing, sanding. And the easiest way to do this is with our old friend masking tape. Just build up a nice protective ridge, number of turns around, so that we're not going to slice beyond that. And now I can take, and using that as a template, reduce the diameter of the cork. And I just turn the grip, or the rod, and the grip with it, as I sand right against that masking plate template. You notice I'm making the same number of strokes and then turning a little bit. Same number of strokes, turning a little bit. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Same technique we've used all along in making handles. Nope, not enough yet. And of course, having everything roughed up like this is good because we're going to get a better epoxy bond. Another thing that you can use when you're doing this shaping, if you want to get down to some really fine things, is an emery board. They come in very, very handy. There we go. If I had epoxy glue on there to lubricate that, as I pushed it into place, I'd be home free. I wouldn't have to force it even that much. And I can peel this off. I got myself a pretty nice blending of butt cap into cork. Now with resilient grips, you have a lot easier time of it because the resilient grip compresses so much. That's why these aluminum caps are so popular. The walls are not too thick, and all you need to do is put some epoxy on here to lubricate it, which would make it easier, and also to glue it, of course, and just push this up in place. And you see how being compressible, this flows in and the lines stay nice and neat. But let's not stop there. Let's make it a little more unique. Put on a hosel. This is the same thing as down here, only I took out the black rubber cap that's on the bottom there, and I just glue this on top, and now I've got what I think is a darn good looking handle. We've picked up the gold from the hoods of the reel seat and put it right on each end of the grip. So that's really all there is to it. We've covered a lot of different ways for you to build your own custom handle. You can inject your personality into it if you want. You can build it very plain if you want. But what's most important is just those few simple construction techniques that we've talked about are all you need to build any kind of rod. Saltwater, freshwater, big rod, little rod, fly rod, musky rod, it doesn't matter. You now have the techniques, put them together, and make that grip and that handle assembly just the way you want. We come now to guides. The proper selection, but especially the proper placement, is one of the best ways that you can make a rod that will outperform a factory rod. This subject was so important that in my book, Advanced Custom Rod Building, I spent a whole chapter on it. Now obviously we can't spend as much time on it here, but I would like to make one very strong point, and that is always buy the best guides that you can afford. Stay away from bargains. Unfortunately, there are a lot of look-alike imitations, and they do perform poorly. And parenthetically, let me inject here that if you see rod building kits featuring name brand blanks at apparent bargain prices, they probably have look-alike imitation guides in them, and I'd avoid them if I were me. The first thing you need to look at when you're talking about guides is the ring material. Today, guides mostly are no longer wire, but they're ceramic material for the ring. The two newest materials, SIC and hardloy, are so hard that they can be polished to where they're practically frictionless. They also are lighter. They don't have the shock ring that the older aluminum oxide guides had, which means they're less air resistant and weigh a little bit less. The next thing after ring material that's important is the height. And let me show you what I mean. If we take this old wire surf guide, 75 millimeter here, and hold it next to a newer ceramic guide, you can see where the ring, the height of the ring, the bottom of the ring, is really higher on the smaller ceramic guide. That's important because it keeps the line from slapping against the blank, and a slapping line robs you of distance. So height is really more important than is the size of the ring with good guides. Another thing is weight. This guide over here is a boat rod guide for saltwater. It's very heavy. This guide is a single foot guide. It's very light. Now, you can use weight creatively. If you have a blank that you want to slow the action down on a little bit, purposefully select a little bit heavier guides. If you want to keep the responsiveness and keep it fast, use the lightest weight guides and probably single foots as well. You'll need to decide on how many guides you need on a particular rod, and we'll run a test in a little bit that'll show you exactly how many you'll need. But here's a rule of thumb that'll be 90 or 95% accurate. On fly rods, you'll need about one guide per foot of length. That's minimum. So on an 8.5 foot rod, you need at least 9 guides, including the stripping guide. On a spinning rod, you can take the length less 1 or 2. So a 7-foot spinning rod would need 5 or 6 guides. Casting rods are going to require the length minus 1. So if we had a 6-foot rod, overall, including the handle, we'll need at least 5 guides. Surf rods give people some trouble, and here's a real easy rule of thumb. Take the length and divide it by 2. So if you have an 11.5 foot surf rod, it's going to take a minimum of 6 guides. Trolling and boat rods are pretty easy. They're going to take either 5 or 6 guides. I have yet to see one that doesn't fall in that range. Okay, we know the number of guides, the type of guide we're going to use. We now need to know the size. And the one guide where size is particularly important is the butt guide. That will account for a lot of the performance and the casting distance on your rod. And let me say before I get into some guidelines that I'll give you here that I'm probably going to be suggesting one size higher than you're used to seeing on factory rods. And the difference is factory rods want to be streamlined. They've got to market them. They're also concerned with shaving every penny in cost. You're not. You're trying to build the best darn rod you can. And to do that often means using a little bit bigger butt guide. Let me show you what I mean. Take a fly rod. If we're going to cast a 5-weight line with it, you can probably get by with a 10 or a 12 for a stripping guide. If we're going to use a 6-weight line or heavier, then we're going to need a 12 or possibly a 16. Take casting rods. The variable here is the width of the casting reel's spool. And narrow spools have become pretty popular. Okay, narrow spool means you probably can get by with a 16. But if it's a wide spool reel, then you're going to need a size 20. Spinning rods use the largest butt guides, as everybody knows. But the variable here is the line that you're going to use. If you're going to use a line, a monofilament that tests under 6 pounds, 2, 4, or 6, you may be able to get by with a 20 as your minimum butt guide. If the line is going to be from 8 to 12 pound test, then you're going to need a 25 as the minimum. If it's over 12 pound test line, then you're going to need a 30 or a 35. Also, if the line is of the limp type, you can often get by with the smaller of the 2 choices. If it's the stiff type mono, go with the larger of 2 choices. All right, once you have your guides, you have to prepare them. And I've got a guide in front of me here. And let me show you the things that I would do before I'm ready to wrap that guide on the rod. The first thing is I want to make sure that these feet are both at the right angle and that they'll sit flat. And I could do that just like this, but I guess just from force of habit I like to put it on a blank so I can lift that up a little, get some backlighting, and see if the guide feet are flat. In this case they are. Another thing that can be annoying is that the guide can be out of alignment. So if I put it down here and hold it with one finger and now switch fingers and press on the other foot and the guide doesn't rock, I'm in good shape. If it rocked when I did that, then I want to take a pair of pliers here, nice needle nose pliers, and bend the frame. You're probably going to have to get a hold of it like this and bend it. Same way if the guide feet weren't flat, I'd bend them down or up as need be. Once I've gotten the guide so that it sits correctly, I now want to dress the feet. That is, I want to grind down the tips. And I can grind them, I can file them, any way to remove material. A simple flat mill file is fine. Just take it and start to taper that edge. The reason I want it tapered is it's going to be much easier to wrap it and it's going to look a lot nicer. I can also use, these are called easy laps, they're diamond dust, they come in a lot of different grits, but I would take a fine one and I can use that to take off the material, get the shape I want. Now I want to smooth it out. You can use fine emery or crocus cloth or sandpaper, or I can go to the fine one of those stones and I get it very, very smooth. Another thing you want to do with the file or whatever it is take your guide and set it on here and deburr the bottom by rubbing it back and forth like that. Then do the same thing on the fine sandpaper and get all of that off the bottom so everything's very smooth. That'll protect your blank. There's the possibility, if you don't do this, of a little burr in there that could damage the blank and subsequently lead to a break. I would like to point out that these little grinding wheel and this wire brush, we've talked already about using an electric drill in a stand. If you chuck these in, you can use this stone as it's spinning to shape the guide feet rather rapidly. Then take that out and put this ordinary wire brush in. And instead of polishing it, you actually just really burnish it against that spinning wire and it gets incredibly smooth. Very, very nice way to do it. The last thing on guides would be the tip top, and that is, how do you mount a tip top? And the answer is with 5-minute epoxy. Don't use regular epoxy because if you ever had a broken tip top and wanted to get it off, you couldn't do it. But with 5-minute epoxy, if you subsequently heat that bond with a soldering iron, you'll be able to break the glue bond and just pull off the tip top and replace it. So that's how you take care of tip tops. To space our guides, we're going to use a combination of two tests, test casting and what I call a stress distribution test. And the reason for this is no two blanks, even from the same production run, are going to flex exactly the same way. This is another area where there's a big difference in factory rods. Obviously, they cannot take the time on each rod when they're producing thousands to do all these kinds of tests. For starters, you have to find a position for the guides, and since we're going to be moving the guides in actual tests, it's not very important where you put them to start with. These are just starting points. For example, let's put the butt guide about 1/3 of the distance from the reel to the tip top of the rod. The guide up at the top, the first one, below the tip top, put that no more than about 5.5 inches. The rest of the guides, simply space them out evenly as they get progressively further apart towards the bottom. As I said, it's not critical. You're going to actually do some casting. Take and mount the rod, or excuse me, mount the reel that you're going to use with the line that you're going to use, and go outside on your lawn and do some test casting. Now what you want to do is, as you cast, you want to move this guide further out. Now this guide, all the guides, have been attached either with tape, and I find masking tape is good, or with little pieces of micro surge tubing that I have here. That enables you to move it a little better. Do your test casting, keep moving this out, And you want to move the butt guide out as far as you can without the lines slapping against the blank in between. That's true of all rods, casting rods, spinning rods, or fly rods. Once you've gotten to that point where you're casting the longest distance, because you've got this butt guide out to the right position, stop. Don't move the butt guide. You now have found the perfect position for it. So, bring your rod back inside, and now we're going to determine the spacing for the rest of the guides, and we'll do that with a stress distribution test. Now, I've got a little rod holder here, which you happen to have, you can use, but to mount the rod, you could also take and wrap the handle with a towel to protect it, put it in a drawer, and then close the drawer. By doing that, you'll hold the rod at about a 45-degree angle. Have the line threaded through the guides. I've put in extra heavy lines so you can see. And then flex the rod, pull it down. Now don't pull it straight down. Pull it down at about a 45-degree angle. And don't overstress it, just enough that would be comparable to a light fish that you might get on that rod, or the maximum that it might bend in casting. What are we looking for? We want to make sure that the line does not touch the blank in between each guide. The line should go from guide to guide without touching the blank. If we found, for example, that these two guides here were too close together and the line would touch, then working from the tip back, we'd move this guide up a bit, move it closer together, because the guides were too far apart. The line would then be, as you see it now, not touching the blank. And we just keep working our way down if need be. You never move the butt guide. We found the position of that one by doing the test casting. If no matter what you can do in moving guides around, you cannot get it so that the line is not touching the blank, now you've reached the point where you know you definitely need one more guide. Put another one of the small guides, of the smallest size you're using, put that in up here, and just progressively space your guides back, but don't change or move that butt guide. For fly rods, you could use a different approach. You can't do this testing whether the line touches the blank or not. Instead, get the help of your wife or a friend, string the line up, go outside, and tie the line to the ground and pull back so that you get a bend in the rod, just as we were doing here. And you get off to the side and look at it. What you want to make sure is that the line follows the curvature of the rod blank. If it does, fine. If not, adjust the position of the guides accordingly. And that's it. What you've just done is you've fine-tuned a sports car. You've taken the perfect spacing for a specific blank with specific guides, and as a result, you're going to get the maximum performance out of it. Now that we have the guides in exactly the right position on our rod, we need to go over how we wrap the guides on with thread. First thing I would caution you about is that you do it in a clean area. You don't want any dust around, so don't do it where you shaped your cork. Also, wash your hands before you wrap. Skin oils can contaminate and subsequently discolor the thread. If you're going to wrap for a long time, take a break in the middle and wash your hands again. The setup, you're going to need something to support the rod, and it can be simple V-blocks such as I have here, which work very nicely, or you can use rod rollers. This particular set was made years ago by a very dear friend of mine, but you can make a much simpler set that'll work just as well. Take a pair of casters and mount them upside down on a block of wood so that the rod is cradled in between and will roll on them. In addition to supporting the rod, you need some way of providing thread tension. And one of the oldest ways it's been used for many, many years by lots of people is a book. Lay a book down, open it up, put your thread behind it. You could put a cup there if you wanted so the thread wouldn't roll. Close the book, and that'll give you a little bit of tension. You want some more tension? Normally you need it. Put another book on top. And now you have enough thread tension to wrap with. I'm going to use this thread tension device that I have clamped on the table, And up on the end of it are a pair of cup discs, and this is with a spring, and it's identical to what's used on sewing machines. And they've used it for many, many years. Now the tools that we use are some kind of a sharp blade. It can be a razor blade or an X-Acto knife, which I prefer. A pair of scissors or snips. I like the snips because you can pick them up and lay them down easily. And then what we call a tie-off loop. And that's just a loop of fishing line or monofilament, maybe 6 to 10 pound. And you've made a loop and tied a couple of knots in the end. And we'll see where that's used to pull the line through. The size thread you use, if you use size A thread, which is the finer, for your freshwater rods, you'll work out real well, and size D, which is a little bit heavier, for your saltwater rods. Okay, let's look at exactly how you do wrap a rod. Take the thread, we pull it over top of the blank, and start a consistent space in front of each guide on the rod. That is the space in front. Allow maybe 3 millimeters or something of that sort. Take the line and bring it around, and always keep tension on the tag end, the loose end. Your tension device is keeping it on the other end until you get it started. Use your finger, your index finger, to push the thread across and make an X. In other words, the thread crosses over itself. Then reach up with your thumb and hold the thread together. Now you can drop this end, reach around, get the end, bring it up around. We've now made an extra turn. And again, take your index finger and push the thread over top for an X again. Now by holding on and keeping this finger holding pressure on the thread, as it turns, I bring this up and I've got about 3 revolutions. I keep pushing it across at the top. I can use my fingernails to push the threads together, and once I've got about 4 or 5 turns, you want to go a little more, you can be on the safe side, take your scissors and cut that tag end off. And now you just start wrapping by turning the blank. This fingernail I'm using to true up the end here. And you'll find that if you turn the blank fairly rapidly, it's going to go on much more easily than if you just stare at it intently and go 1 turn at a time very, very slowly. Instead, wrap it fairly rapidly. It should climb right up over the guide foot, and that's the reason why we shaped that guide foot and made it slope. This way the thread climbs easily. Now you get to this point, which I'm probably maybe 8, 10 turns from the end. Here's where we're going to use that tie-off loop that I spoke about. We're going to take it and we're going to put the loop end in away from the direction we've wrapped. In other words, always put the loop in towards the guide ring. And I'm going to turn this around, perhaps you can see it better. And we'll lay this in here like this. And now I'm going to just make a wrap right over top. Okay? And my loop is in there. And once it's in, I can position it. I'm going to put it on the back side like that. Use my thumbnails whenever necessary to push the threads up together. And now just, see, you can pull them with this thumbnail too. Now continue to wrap until I've gone to the end of the guide foot, whatever number of turns that takes. And now I want to stop. I'm going to take my thumb and my index finger in my left hand and hold on to the wrap so it can't go anywhere. I'm going to release some of the tension on here, take my scissors and cut the thread, take that end of the thread and I'm going to poke it through the tie-off loop. Okay? And now I'm going to have to hold on to that tag end with my left hand. My right hand's holding the wrap and squeezing it, my left hand is holding on to the tag end. I hold that straight up like that, and I'm resting, my left hand's keeping the rod from turning. Get a hold of that tie-off loop and just pull it right through, just like that, in a fairly brisk movement. Now the thread has been whipped under. If you're a fly tyer, you're familiar with that. That's a whip finish. You've got that there. Now we need the blade. Pull this up fairly tight, lay the blade on flat, because I just want to cut that very end of the thread. Now if I let it go at that, I'm going to have a bit of a nub there. And here's my little the secret, the way I get rid of nubs, and everybody's got their own way. I take my fingernail, I'm going to push at about a 45-degree angle like this, right across where I cut that thread. And in doing so, I open the thread up a tiny bit, but then I bring my fingernail back and tighten it up. By opening it and pushing it 45 degrees, I pulled that little end underneath. All right, we have a nice wrap, but it's not quite as perfect as you like. Let me introduce another tool. This one's called a thread tool, but any smooth, round surface will do as a burnisher. This burnisher, you're going to use your thumbnail of your left hand to keep it from sliding off that end, and just rub the wrap back and forth as you turn it. And this will flatten out the threads. It will take out any gaps that exist in the threads and make it look very nice. And there you are. You've got a guide wrapped on. All you need to do to wrap this guide on is turn the blank this way, peel off the masking tape, and again wrap from left to right. Start the same distance out here as you did out there. Your guide wraps will look a lot better if they have a trim band of a contrasting or complementary color on the end. And let me show you how to wrap those. You're going to use a tie-off loop right from the very beginning. And it's best if you work on the back side of the rod. And I'm going to hold the tie-off loop in position right as I start this thread. Put the thread there, as we did before. Come around, make an X, cross over. Just exactly the same as we started the regular guide wrap. I'm keeping hold of the thread until I get about 3 or 4 turns on. Now I can cut that tag end off. And I'll cut it very close. And now I'll proceed to wrap a few more turns on, cover up that tag end, and also get the trim band of the desired width, like that. Hold it tight, release the tension on the thread, cut it off. Sometimes these tie-off loops will lay down on you, a little static electricity. Pull it up, poke the thread through the loop, hold it up. I'm keeping the pressure on. Take our tie-off loop, draw the thread down to it, and now what's very important, I'm just holding that against there, take the index finger and the thumb of this hand and squeeze that little narrow band before you pull the loop out. And that keeps it from unraveling since you have a rather narrow band. You can make the band tighter and more narrow with your thumbnail, rotated. Again, we want to trim off the tag end that we had pulled under with a blade. And be careful about pushing this one for the nub. Just very gently push it. And there you are, you have a nice trim band on. Now, when I wrap guides, I start wrapping from the tip end and work down towards the butt end, always aligning each guide on the tip top, which you'll remember that tip top, when we set that up in the first place, that was in reference to the mark we had of the spine. It was either on the spine or exactly 180 degrees to it. So now by wrapping each guide and aligning it to the tip, I know that I'm doing it correctly. Let me show you how I check that alignment. Here's a rod that I've got a couple of guides wrapped on, and too often people do this. They try and sight down to see if the guides are lined up, and it's very difficult to find it. Instead, try this technique. Take and hold the rod out at about a 45-degree angle at arm's length and look at it from the back. Now what you want to see is that the tip of the rod will bisect the tip top itself, and by rotating it I can make an adjustment. Now I have it centered so that looking down, the first guide below it, the blank should be bisecting the guide, and the third one similarly. Well, you can see it's way off to the side. So what I would have to do would be to bring this back, and it's very easy really to take the rod and turn that that guide. I say very easy. It shouldn't be so loose that I could flip-flop it, but if I cannot rotate that guide, then that's an indication that I have too much thread tension, and that's dangerous. You want to be careful of too much thread tension because it could cause the blank to be crushed ultimately by the guide being pressed into it. One of the major manufacturers of blanks ran a study some years ago, and they found that the biggest cause for failure was wrapping under too much tension. And you'll find that out if when you go to adjust your guide, if you can't move it, you've used too much tension. Keep in mind it's going to be encapsulated in a finish which will protect it. Okay, let's look at another kind of wrap, and that is an underwrap. The underwrap principally was developed for protecting the blank against very heavy-duty guides. Roller guides, you always use an underwrap with a roller guide on a saltwater rod, or heavy-duty boat rods. They look very nice cosmetically, so that people building light freshwater rods said, gee, I'd like to do that. People are divided on whether or not it's advisable on a light rod. While it does look pretty, that's the plus side. The minus side is that you're adding weight, not so much from the second layer of thread, but from the extra finish needed to cover that thread. If you do decide to use an underwrap, regardless of the size of rod, always make the underwrap, the yellow portion here on the bottom, make that of a smaller size thread, such as A. Make the actual guide wrap of a larger size, such as D, that AD combination again. This way, it's much easier to wrap. If you try and use the same size thread, you're trying to balance each turn on top of the other, and that's pretty difficult. One last wrap that you'll always want to use is a ferrule wrap on a two-piece rod. And I'm thinking here of the female ferrule. It's made of glass or graphite, and that's this section right here. You need to provide additional hoop strength in this area, and this can best be done by wrapping with A thread. From an engineering standpoint, all you really would need for that hoop strength would probably be 1/4 of an inch, but cosmetically that doesn't look pleasing, so the best approach is to wrap the entire ferrule. Size A thread is used. You don't want to use excessive tension, as we mentioned before, because if you do, you actually can constrict that opening so it wouldn't fit on top of the male ferrule. The color is a matter of personal preference. You can either take a color that will blend with the blank or select a color that will blend with the guide wraps that you've used on the rest of the rod. But always wrap a ferrule wrap on all your two-piece rods. One of the things that you'll definitely want to do with a custom-built rod is to inscribe it. Put your name on as the builder, as the owner. And also, if you're building a rod for someone else as a gift, which is a nice thing to do, incidentally, you might want to consider a 3-line inscription. And there you'd put on the first line, custom built for, then on the next line, John Doe or whoever it was, and on the third line, by your name, Harry Rodfelder. Okay. What we need to write on these dark blanks is some kind of a heavily pigmented ink, and white India ink just doesn't do it. And most of the blanks are dark today. They're either graphite or they're dark brown or black. And I found that this whiteout, which is a typewriter correction fluid, really works quite well. It has the advantage of being water soluble, so if I have a damp paper towel handy and make a mistake, I can wipe it off. You first need to break the gloss on the blank, and I use a little scuff pad that we call smooth scuff for that purpose. You could also use fine, like 600 grit sandpaper. And all you need to do here is scuff up the blank to give a little tooth, to break the gloss. You don't need to sand it or rub it very heavily. Just wipe that off. The pen, use a regular artist pen with a removable point, and shake up your ink first, and use the brush in the cap to charge or fill the pen point. And start to write right away with it. sometimes you've got to try putting some more ink, or even it's necessary to wipe off the ink. There, we've got it flowing. And there's often, if you have an overhead light to your setup, there'll be a line of more or less reflected light that'll come from up above that you can use to help line up your writing so it doesn't wander all over the blank. And there you are. All you need to do to clean up is use that damp paper towel to wipe off your pen point. And then leave this set. Probably a few hours is all that's really necessary, but you want it to dry. And then when you apply the wrapping finish to your thread wraps, just cover this with a coat of the finish, and that'll protect it and be there permanently. The finish that we apply to our thread wraps serves two purposes. One, of course, it protects the thread, but the other thing that it does is that it beautifies them, puts a nice high sheen on them. You want to make sure that you always work when you're doing your finishing in a dust-free area. Dust is the last thing you want. And also the temperature should be about 68 or 70 degrees or warmer. And finishing is really a two-step process. We use two different chemicals. One, we use a color sealant, which if we didn't use, the thread would turn translucent when we put the finish on. So we apply color sealant, a number of coats of that, let it dry, and then we apply the finish. Now I'd suggest that for a color sealant, you don't use the older lacquer color preserver type, because what it used to do, and it will if you use it, is it'll yellow your wraps and it'll make them prone to crack. There are many new water-soluble finishes on the market, such as this Brilliance. And this is a mixture here of 50-50. It's half Brilliance and half water. Nothing critical about the mix, but we thin it this way for the first two coats. And the reason we do this is we want this to penetrate well into the thread and also displace the air that's trapped in the thread windings. Now if you simply hold it underneath the wrap like this and go just a little beyond the edge of the thread onto the blank and come over the entire wrap. Now you'll notice I'm applying this, oops, just wipe that off with your finger because it's nothing harmful about it at all. I'm working from the outside towards the inside, towards the guide ring. That's to try and get the air out of the tunnel. And I'm also going to poke some finish into the tunnel. And the tunnel is nothing more than a little hollow space where the thread bridges from the top of the guide over to the side of the blank. And saturate these threads well. At this stage, no necessity to be real polished and smooth about it. And that's it. You allow this to dry about a couple of hours and then do exactly the same thing. Put another coat of 50-50 mix. And then I let it dry overnight and put a full coat, or a coat of full 100% Brilliance on. And that really gives it body and seals everything up very well, and allow it to dry overnight. Then you're ready to do your finishing. Now I'm going to set this aside and we'll move on to a rod that already has the finish applied, or excuse me, not the finish, but the sealant's been applied. There are the two coats of 50-50 and the one coat full strength. Now there are a lot of different two-part wrapping finishes on the market today, but I'd like to suggest that you use one of the solvent-based types. It's two-part epoxy, but there is some solvent in there, and it's a more versatile finish, and you'll get better results. I have one of that type here called Crystal Coat. But what it does, it doesn't have a bubble problem, and it flows out very, very nicely. You can thin it with epoxy thinner when you're using it on a very light rod, and on the other hand, you can use it in a number of layers on a heavy-duty rod to build it up. Measuring of all two-part finishes, doesn't matter what they are, is critical. You want to use something that you can be very, very accurate on. I like these metal measuring spoons. avoid anything to do with plastic. I use metal measuring spoon, wood stir, foil or a bottle. These are the little butter cups made of foil. Anything other than plastic to mix and hold the mixture. But measure very carefully, exactly an equal amount, scrape it out with a wood stir, and then stir it well. Follow the directions on the bottle. To apply this finish, notice I'm going to use another brush, and I have a habit of marking my brushes, this one with an F, which means that I always use this for finish. The other brush I use for the color sealant. And this goes on much like we put the sealant on, except now we're going to be a little more careful in our application. Just start it so that it's just past the edge of the wrap, and just flow it on nicely. You can brush it sideways if you like, but most of us seem to have the best results by holding it on like that. Now if you get a little on the edge, as I did, just take your finger and lift that edge slightly. Cover the whole wrap, and on a small guide like this, I cover the space in between. And make sure that that tunnel, which should have been sealed off by color sealant, kind of plugged up with it, being an invisible barrier, this will now flow all around it. As I said, you don't want to put too much on and get a very bulbous look to it. Not only does it not look good on today's slimmer graphite blanks, but it also adds unnecessary weight. The test of how much finish you need is simply after it's dry, if you take and you rub your fingernail across it, if you can still feel the ridges of thread, you don't have enough on. But anything much beyond that is strictly excess weight. I allow this to dry overnight in a good dust-free area. Turn it probably a couple of times within the first 20 minutes. And I mean by turning it, move it up like this, and let it set for maybe 10 minutes, and then back down again. And overnight is fine for it to dry. As we said at the beginning of this tape, you can build a better rod than you can buy, and certainly one better suited to your exact fishing needs. We hope that we've whetted your appetite or aroused your interest now that you've seen just how easy and how much fun some of these basic rod building and assembly techniques can be. For some of the statistical information, you might want to consult some of the books on rod building, but you have a good idea now of what it takes to put that rod together. Thousands and thousands of fishermen are building their own rods. In fact, since 1974, there's been an organization called Rod Crafters that puts out a bi-monthly journal, Rod Crafters Journal, that consists entirely of shared ideas on building rods. If you'd like more information, as editor, I'd be delighted to send it to you. Just write me in care of Rod Crafters at 444 Shantz Spring Road, Allentown, Pennsylvania, 18104. If as you progress along in your rod building, you start to get fascinated with the different ways that you can be creative and beautify a custom rod, and I say this because most of us that are in it really do get caught up in this part of it, and I'm talking about intricate thread work and nice handle inlays and so on, then you're going to want to view our tape, Custom Rod Crafting. But even the longest journey has to start with a single step, and I suggest you take that step and build your own rod. You're really going to like it.
Largemouth bass. If you want to tackle the hard-hitting action of America's favorite game fish, the 3M Sportsman's Video Collection has a complete series of original programs that'll make you the best bass angler on your water. There's Big Mouth, a classic film that puts you in the bass's world. years in the making, edited from miles of incredible underwater footage. You'll see the secrets of bass behavior and why they're so challenging and exciting to catch. Nobody understands big bass better than Doug Hannon, the bass professor. In the Hannon Big Bass videos, you'll learn the newest, most innovative ideas about finding and catching bass. Through amazing underwater photography, you'll see how bass detect and strike lures. You'll learn to recognize the locations that hold big bass. And when you're ready to tie into one of these lunkers, Doug will show you his complete system for going after really big bass. The special lures, the necessary equipment and skills. Doug prepares you to catch the bass of a lifetime. For a look at bass fishing from top to bottom, spend a day on the water with championship fisherman Ricky Clemens. Ricky will show you how to find bass fast in unfamiliar waters and catch them with all the top techniques, from worm fishing to flipping. When you understand the whys behind the sport, the how-tos make a lot more sense. That's the secret of our trail-breaking Bass Mastery series with Al Lindner. Al shows you the basic principles behind his ability to catch more and bigger bass. With Al's formula for success, you'll be able to locate the bass hotspots, know what the fish are doing, and then select the right presentation. You'll catch more bass more consistently under a wide range of conditions. In the active spring period, Al shows you how to deal with the rapidly changing conditions of spring as the bass go through pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn patterns. It's the fast and efficient way to springtime fishing excitement. You can beat the dog days of July and August and still catch bass when few other anglers know what to do. Weather changes, human pressure, the effects of light and shade. You'll be able to master them all when you learn Al's surefire strategies for summer. In the Trophy Bass of Fall, Al shows you how to find those tight groups of really big cold water bass. Discover why fall conditions offer the best opportunity to land a trophy. The Bass Mastery programs, no other videos do more to develop all your angling skills. How to interpret local conditions, how to find bass, and how to pick the right lures. 3M Bass Fishing videos. We're the best at making you better. And if you love fishing, hunting, and other sports, think of 3M as your total video resource for outdoor adventure. The gentle beauty of a deep forest glade. The heart-pounding excitement of a trophy buck in rut. Going one-on-one with North America's most popular big game animal. That's what deer hunting's all about. And nobody brings you more in-depth information and true-life action than the 3M Sportsman's Video Collection. The excitement of calling a bird into your gun. The satisfaction of making a clean shot. And the companionship of a well-trained dog. If you like the challenge of upland game bird and waterfowl hunting, 3M Sportsman's Video Collection gives you the thrill of being there and the knowledge you need to master the sport. If it's excitement you're after, come fishing with the experts from 3M Scientific Anglers and learn ways to catch more and bigger trout on the fly. You'll learn where to find trout in a stream and ways to present the right fly with the perfect cast so you can catch the most elusive trout during hatch and non-hatch situations. Plus, there's steelheading for 20-pound rainbows or going for the ultimate saltwater challenge. Let 3M Scientific Anglers bring home the excitement while you learn a lifetime of mastery techniques that will help you become the best fly fisherman you can be.